Okay, so with that, Greg's going to talk about more in depth each of the efforts that we just highlighted, as well as the learning agenda, which is something I know that you're all interested in, that the agency's developing, and hopes will be informed by all of your work.
We need to do.
And I think one starting point is to sort of position the chronology here. The effort in the Horn certainly, and partially in the Sahel, actually predate the release of the policy, and actually were used to inform it. So it was not as though we had a clear conceptual framework we were working with when we began in the Horn. We made some strides there. We made some additional strides in the Sahel. I think this policy that Catherine just presented on really highlights a sort of consolidation of thinking through those processes. So it's sort of a starting point for moving forward, and a really good piece of work. Okay, next slide. So what I'm going to run through is, I call it an agenda here. I always struggled with what to call it. It's not an initiative. It has no money actually tied to it, so I call it an agenda here. But maybe the better way to describe it is what USAID is currently doing in this sort of resilience realm. So I'll go briefly, in addition to what Catherine did on the rationale for new investments. I'll talk about internal joint planning cells that were formed in the Horn and the Sahel. And that's a very sort of devious name for a very innocent process of bringing humanitarian development sides of USAID together to have a dialogue about addressing the underlying causes of these recurrent crises. And those, the new investments that came out of that both include new programs, layering in on existing programs, but also a learning agenda for the Horn, a learning agenda for the Sahel. The two are linked, and we would envision some link with what you're doing as we all collectively grapple with resilience, what it is, and most importantly, how we build it. Then I'm going to talk about Global Alliance and the Alliance Globale, what they are, how our work fits, our investments in resilience fit under those two, and then briefly touch on measuring resilience and some of the priorities that have been identified by USAID for 2013. Okay, so impetus and rationale were already touched upon, but I sort of like to think about it in three frames. One is a humanitarian imperative, these areas of recurrent crisis, reducing loss of life, improving livelihoods, and improving dignity. For those of us who have worked in the drylands of the Horn for a number of years, returning to the same place every 3 years to put a Band-Aid on a problem you know has deep structural, deeply rooted problems is very frustrating. So there is that humanitarian imperative. There is also a development imperative in the sense that if we look at the case of Kenya from 2009 to 2012, there was a $12 billion loss in livestock associated with drought. That puts a tremendous drag on the economy and economic potential. And then finally, the economic imperative that my colleague referred to. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but DFID did a study of looking at the value for money of early investments, essentially investments in risk reduction and resilience, versus simply responding every 2 to 3 years in response to humanitarian crises. And it depended on the nature of the activity, but we were looking at a 10-to-1 return on that investment. I think that although there's problems and challenges with quantifying that, it speaks to what we all intuitively know, that the solution isn't to keep dumping in these large amounts of money to humanitarian crises. And that $90 billion number is certainly a call to attention. The real call to attention and the reason resilience rose up and is getting defined and becoming its own agenda is we spent, as USAID alone, this is not the entire donor community, we spent $1 billion in responding to the humanitarian crisis in the Horn in 2011, another $500 million in the Sahel. So I think that that's the sort of, is it the straw that broke the camel's back, that economic imperative, but it certainly adds to the argument, and then we build up steam around these other imperatives as well. And this isn't exactly a linear trend, but what we do know is that if we look back in time, a long time in different countries, that the humanitarian caseloads are growing. In part that's due to population growth, in part it's due to a decline of sort of divestment and distress that makes people more and more vulnerable going forward. But we do know it's growing, so that's yet another